Good morning. I'm Stephen Romo.
And I'm Zinclea Samoa. Joe and Savannah are off this morning. Right now on Morning News Now, motive and means. Dramatic developments in the double murder trial of Alec Murdaugh. This morning, the defense set to give their closing arguments after the prosecution wrapped its case, painting Murdaugh as a man living a lie and willing to kill his own wife and son to protect it.
He's fooled them all. And he fooled Maggie and Paul, too. And they paid for it with their lives.
All this after jurors get a first-hand look at the scene of the crime. We have team coverage this morning. Attorney General Merrick Garland in the hot seat on Capitol Hill, facing some of his toughest critics over a number of controversies under his watch. We'll bring you highlights from his testimony before a Republican-led Senate committee. Also this morning, a new warning from the CDC about what it calls a serious public health threat. What you need to know about a highly infectious drug-resistant stomach bug and the people most at risk. Finally, blast off. New this morning, NASA's SpaceX crew celebrating a successful launch after calling off its first attempt earlier this week. More on the mission, the astronauts on board, and what it all means for the future of space exploration. We begin with the latest developments in the double murder trial of Alec Murdaugh, with the defense set to present their closing arguments this morning. Yeah, prosecutor Creighton Waters delivered the state's closing arguments yesterday against the disbarred South Carolina attorney. Murdaugh is accused of murdering both his wife Maggie and their son Paul. During his statements, Waters again argued to the jury that the evidence in the case shows Murdaugh carried out the killings, the prosecutor saying all in an effort to mask his financial troubles.
He'd avoided accountability his whole life. He had relied on his family name. He had a powerful family. He carried a badge and used that authority. He lived a wealthy life. But now finally, he was facing complete ruin. He couldn't live for that. He's the kind of person for which shame is an extraordinary provocation.
Throughout the case, Murdaugh's defense team has pushed back against the prosecution's theory behind Murdaugh's motive, arguing that the prosecution has not shown evidence showing how Murdaugh would benefit financially from the deaths of his wife and son.
Yeah, this all comes as the jury got to do something that few of them get to. They toured the Murdaugh's family property where these killings happened. We have our team here to break down the latest on the Murdaugh trial. NBC News legal analyst Stanley Savalos and trial consultant Richard Gabriel, both on standby to help walk us through all of these developments. But first, let's go to NBC News correspondent Ellison Barber, who's live outside the courthouse in Walterboro, South Carolina, with more. Ellison, good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Ellison. So to start, good morning. Can you walk us through the key takeaways from the prosecution's closing arguments yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, it was complicated. These were very long closing arguments. This has been a very long trial. But what you heard the prosecutor say a lot in his closing remarks was gathering storm. He described this gathering storm that he says was putting so much pressure on Alec Murdaugh that he felt his only way out, his only chance to buy some time to cover his tracks was by killing his family. And really, when they're talking about that gathering storm, they were breaking it down into three key motivating factors. They said, one, there was this history of financial crime, specifically one legal case that he had been working on within his firm where people had started to notice that the legal fees he'd gotten, they were missing. His firm, his colleagues, they were asking questions. They were starting to investigate him. Then there was a boat crash in 2019 where his son Paul was accused of driving the boat that killed 19-year-old Mallory Beach, a boat that was owned by Alec Murdaugh. He was named as a defendant in a multi-million-dollar civil suit. The attorney in that case testified that once Alec Murdaugh's family was dead, that case against him was essentially over because he was too sympathetic of a defendant and they had other more culpable defendants that they would have to go ahead with in that case. The third thing in that gathering storm, they say, was the fact that Alec Murdaugh's father was dying, someone he trusted, someone he was close with. They say all of that was just too much for Alec Murdaugh to bear and that his way out was killing both his son and his wife. They also said, hey, look at his history, listen and remember to everything you have heard from people who knew him so well. They say Alec Murdaugh's life was basically a Ponzi scheme and he was a skilled lawyer, and anytime things got tough, he manipulated and lied. Listen.
Everyone who thought they were close to him, everyone who thought they knew he was who he was, he's fooled them all. And he fooled Maggie and Paul too. And they paid for it with their lives. Don't let him fool you too.
And remember, so much of the prosecution's case has focused on GPS data, cell phone data. They say, look at the timeline, look at the technology. There is only one person who could have been there that night, and there is only one person who had the means, the motive, and the opportunity. And the prosecutors, they say that was Alec Murdaugh. Sinclair, Stephen.
Yeah, prosecutors hitting that timeline very hard in their closing arguments yesterday. Allison, the jury got to tour the Moselle family property where these murders actually happened. Can you talk to us about what were they actually able to see out there?
Yeah, so they had 30 minutes on the grounds. They were seeing that outside of the press. The video that we have access to is because the press was able to see exactly what the jury saw after they saw it. They were able to see the outside of the main house, which is what we're looking at right here. They were also able to spend time where these murders occurred over at the kennels. We've heard a lot of talk from both the prosecution and the defense about the feed room, the size of that space where Paul Murdaugh's body was found in the doorway, and the distance between Paul Murdaugh and Maggie Murdaugh. The jury was able to walk through and see all of that. Our colleagues who were traveling with them, while they weren't able to see every moment of what the jury was doing, they did say they could see one juror standing in the doorway of that feed room, looking up and seeming to try and get a sense of just the size in that space. There was a lot that you could see still kind of a little bit left over from what happened here. The big thing is there is like a stain on the cement where Paul Murdaugh was killed. Everything else has been cleared out. The state had made a big point of that beforehand, saying this crime scene has changed a lot, but the judge decided at the defense's request that it was worth the jury having the opportunity to physically see where all of this occurred. Stephen, Sinclair.
An unusual move there. We're going to talk more about it. Ellison, thanks so much.
Thank you. And we have NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos on set to help us walk through this case. Also here with us is trial consultant and author of Acquittal, Richard Gabriel, to give us insight into the jury process. So, Danny, let's start with you. The prosecution has to show burden of proof. That seems to be the key phrase here. Burden of proof. After yesterday's closing arguments, is there room for reasonable doubt?
We'll see if the defense can create it. I mean, as a defense attorney, the thing I'm going to be hammering, if I'm them, is that burden of proof. I even have a chart that I use. Then you go up a sort of layered continuum and you say, well, look, even if you think it is highly likely that my client is guilty, then you must acquit. Even if you think he's probably guilty, you must acquit. Only if you make or reach the highest level, the highest burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, which really means to the exclusion of a reasonable doubt, then you can convict. Sometimes when you're on the defense, it is the only thing you have going for you. And I venture to say that this is one of those cases where you're going to hear reasonable doubt, the burden of proof, and the presumption of innocence over and over and over again. It's what you argue when you don't have a lot else.
And Richard, we know that as we were talking about, the jury did get to visit that Moselle property where these murders happened. Not completely unheard of for a jury to go do this, but a pretty rare thing. How could that influence their decision?
Well, it's crucial for jurors because they want to have a sense of what it is. They've been hearing about it. It's all two-dimensional and verbal, and they're there. They can feel the gravity. They can feel the seriousness, and they can measure three basic components. What's the timing, the distance, and the space? Because they want to know, especially with opportunity, that feed room is really small. Does he have the opportunity? Can he really do it in there? And then how long is it going to take him to move up to the house? If for some reason he's not guilty, how long does it take him to get up there, take a nap? Or if he did do it, is he going to be able to shower? And also, if he didn't do it, can he hear the sound of gunshots? All those things can be much more measured when they're there in the scene and they have a sense of the physical space.
And Richard, you touched on it. There's just been so much information here. We know that they've even looked at Murdaugh's steps at the time, in addition to a lot of electronic data. Of course, they brought in information about were there multiple shooters? Was he big enough to fit? So, Danny, I wonder, with the closing arguments expected today, what are you expecting to hear?
Yeah, the state had a challenge in that they had too much evidence, and it's hard to marshal all of that. The defense, on the other hand, doesn't have a lot. They're going to focus on 2 or 3 points that came out in the case in chief and in the defense's case, one of which is the theory by an engineer that a shooter was 5 feet tall. Next up, the idea that one expert conceded that there may have been more than one shooter. That's a very significant one because then you can argue to the jury, well, if it's 50-50, 50-50 is not reasonable doubt. And then thirdly, I don't even know if you can count this, Murdaugh's own theory on the stand where he utters the idea that, oh, Paul had all these nasty social media comments. By the way, did they introduce any of those social media comments? No. And the theory that mean people on social media commit murders. I mean, folks, I guarantee you've had some nasty things said about you on social media. It's obviously serious if it's a threat, but that kind of theory without any evidence is a hard one to swallow. So they're going to hammer those, and then they're going to pound the podium on reasonable doubt, presumption of innocence, and the prosecution hasn't met their burden, because that's about all they have.
It'll be fascinating to see. And Richard, obviously you know a lot about juries. What are you expecting once they actually get in that room behind that closed door? What are you expecting there?
Well, for the most part, everybody's got their mind made up even before closing arguments. It's really about arming your advocates in closing argument. You got to pick out who are the people I think are going to carry the water for me. And so when you get in the room, they already know pretty much who the foreperson is because the social dynamic that goes on in the trial. And so it's a matter of them actually negotiating, because what happens is they don't know exactly what their positions are. They may come in there and they may go, hey, we're all pretty much in agreement. They may also say, no, we're completely split here. And then it's a matter of, okay, or some people might say, we have some real questions that they have to answer. So then it's a process of, okay, let's go through the evidence, let's figure it out. There's two typical types of deliberations. There's verdict-driven and evidence-driven. Verdict-driven is usually a quicker verdict because it's, let's go around the table, how many yeses, how many nos. That's usually fast. But evidence-driven is let's go through all the evidence, and that can take some time.
Oh, so much to dig into here. We're all watching it. Danny Savalas and Gabriel, thank you so much.
All right, on Capitol Hill yesterday, Attorney General Merrick Garland faced a grilling from the Senate Judiciary Committee. The explosive hearing focused on a range of topics, including the rise of fentanyl-related deaths and the protesters who had gathered outside the homes of conservative justices after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. NBC News congressional correspondent Julie Sirkin is with us now with more on all of this. A lot that they talked about yesterday, Julie. I know Senator Cruz really hammered Garland on the issue of those protesters who went outside of the justice's home. Walk us through, what were the key points Cruz was trying to make there?
Yeah, well, look, this was Garland's first appearance before the Senate Judiciary Committee in a year. So there was a lot to talk about, and essentially think about his appearance like a yearly review before the panel. And you had some heavy hitters on the Republican side on the panel, including Senator Ted Cruz, who decided to use his moment of questioning to focus on Roe v. Wade, on Dobbs, and the fallout from that, specifically as it relates to security threats made against Supreme Court justices. Take a listen to that exchange, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
Has the Department of Justice brought even a single case under this statute? It's a yes, no question. It's not a give a speech on the other things you did.
The job of the United States Marshals is to defend the lives.
So the answer is no.
It's to defend the lives of the justices, and that's their number one priority. They have.
Why are you unwilling to say no? The answer is no. You know it's no. I know it's no. Everyone in this hearing room knows it's no. You're not willing to answer a question. Have you brought a case under this statute? Yes or no?
As far as I know, we haven't, and what we have done is defended the lives of the justices.
So Cruz was talking about the attempted assassination of Justice Brett Kavanaugh over the summer. He also went on to crisis pregnancy centers and protesters targeting those areas. So heated exchange in those moments.
Yeah, it got quite heated. I know there was some more heat as well. Committee members zeroing in on the ongoing issue of those fentanyl-related deaths. What was going on that front?
Well, this was actually interesting because it was one of the moments of agreement between Garland, between Republicans and Democrats on the panel. Durbin, who chairs the committee, the top Democrat, he actually said that he had committed to Lindsey Graham, the ranking member, the top Republican there, to spend equal time discussing gun violence as they do fentanyl deaths. So this was definitely a big topic of the hearing. Take a listen to one point of questioning from Senator Cornyn.
Your 71,000 roughly of fentanyl overdoses. Do you consider your current policies successful?
We have a huge epidemic of fentanyl problem created by intentional acts by the cartels. We are doing everything we can within our resources to fight that. I have personally twice traveled to Mexico to try to get greater cooperation from the Mexicans on exactly the problem you're talking about.
Yeah, certainly this was a big topic. Millions of Americans being affected, dying every single year from fentanyl deaths, which are crossing over the border. And this is a committee that is also looking into the immigration issue. So that's important to keep in mind as you listen to that line of questioning to Garland.
All right, Julie Sirkin, thanks so much for breaking that down.
Now to your weather this morning. It seems like snow is on a nationwide tour.
It sure does. Meteorologist Angie Lassman joins us now with the latest on the winter system heading toward the south. Not a tour I'm buying tickets for, Angie.
Yeah, I won't be either, but luckily we're in New York where we really haven't had a whole lot to deal with, but we will have a wintry mix that's going to work in over the next couple of days. But today, it's all about the severe weather that's focused into parts of the south. It's going to be a really active afternoon and into the evening hours, and one that folks are going to want to pay attention to and have a way to get any watches or warnings because there is a potential for some strong tornadoes. Here's the system that is the culprit of this tour, as you guys have said. We're going to see it race into parts of the southern plains. That's where the main focus of the severe weather is going to be today. But there's the wintry mix that will stretch from parts of the Great Lakes into the Northeast in New England, and the rain stretching down into parts of the south where once again we will see strong to severe storms tomorrow. Eventually we'll see this work out and we'll have a better weekend on tap for us. But there's a whole lot of impacts that we're going to have to watch for over the next couple of days. The tornado risk, the flooding, we have ice, we have snow. All of that is going to be something that you'll want to pay attention to depending on where you live. So let's start with the severe weather. This dangerous setup that we're seeing really gives the bullseye to places like Shreveport, Lufkin, Alexandria, Little Rock. That's where we'll see the best chance to see some of these stronger storms, and where you see this shaded or this striped, rather, I should say, red bubble. That's where we have the best chance for some of these stronger tornadoes. And this isn't just a couple of hours. This is going to be afternoon into the evening hours and, of course, through tonight. We know that when the sun goes down, those tornadoes are much more dangerous than nocturnal tornadoes. So just be aware of that if you live in that area. And gearing up and preparing for tomorrow, the southeast, you're also going to have to watch for strong storms. Not as likely to see those tornadoes or as many of them, but we will have to keep a close eye on that. We've got plenty of rain working through. We've got gusty conditions with this, and we also have that snow and ice accumulation that I mentioned for parts of the Northeast and the Gulf or in the Great Lakes, guys.
Let it snow, let it snow, let it snow.
Yeah, I've been lucky here in New York, not getting much of that snow.
I want the snow.
What?
That's just you.
Snow angels, snowmen, we love it all.
We'll have to get to the bottom of this one. All right, Angie, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Well, coming up on Morning News now, hundreds of schoolgirls in Iran poisoned. Critics are calling it an attempt to shut down education for girls.
When we come back, the criminal investigation now underway as the fight over women's rights escalates. We're back with news from Iran. Authorities there are investigating the poisoning of hundreds of schoolgirls over the course of several months.
Yeah, dozens of girls are now being treated. They had respiratory problems and other symptoms as well. Some officials are saying these poisonings may have been intentional. NBC News foreign correspondent Josh Letterman joins us now with more on this. A disturbing situation there, Josh.
That's right, very disturbing. And many of these students have reported symptoms that have ranged from heart palpitations and breathing trouble to nausea, headaches, and even numbness. Some of the students and their teachers have reported strange odors that they said smelled like chlorine or other cleaning chemicals. That led to some initial speculation that maybe these poisonings were accidental. But now Iran's leaders insist they are taking this very seriously. Outside a high school in Tehran, confusion. About a dozen students apparently victims of poisoning. Local media reporting girls have been sickened in at least 30 schools across Iran. One Iranian lawmaker putting the number at about 900 students injured since November. This woman in Qom says it smells like cooking gas coming down into the classroom. While this schoolgirl says it made her feel dizzy. She says, my entire body feels very numb and it doesn't allow me to walk. But amid fears this is all a campaign to shut down girls' education, Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi taking action. Iranian state media reporting he's now tasking Iran's interior minister with investigating the cause and coordinating the response. A criminal investigation by the prosecutor general is also underway. A big step after senior Iranian officials had been downplaying the incidents as recently as today. Iran's deputy interior minister saying more than 99% of this is caused by stress, rumors, and psychological war by hostile TV channels. He says their goal was to force schools to close. Unlike the Taliban in Afghanistan, Iran's theocratic government has not traditionally targeted girls for seeking an education. But other women's rights issues have been front and center for months, amid protests set off by the death in September of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. Iran's morality police had detained her for allegedly violating Iran's law on headscarves for women. Hundreds more died in the protests that followed.
Do you believe that what we're seeing right now is connected to the protests?
There's no coincidence that it would suddenly happen at this moment, and the government knows that the protests are not dead.
In Iran, parents in fear, some reportedly pulling their kids out of class, as authorities vow to find out what is sickening Iran's school children and why. A member of Iran's parliament who runs the education committee says health officials have now detected evidence of nitrogen gas, which could explain many of those symptoms that have sent those school children to the hospital. All of this creating a heightened sense of anxiety in a country of some 80 million people, where women have traditionally made up more than half of the student population in universities. Stephen and Zinkley.
Josh, thanks so much.
More international news now. The U.S. has just approved a multi-million-dollar major arms sale with Taiwan.
NBC News foreign correspondent Megan Fitzgerald joins us now for this and more. Megan, good morning.
Guys, good morning to you. Yeah, several stories to get to, but want to start first in Taiwan. As you mentioned, the U.S. State Department now saying that they've approved selling Taiwan millions of dollars worth of munitions, including missiles used for F-16s. Now, this latest sale is likely to be yet another point of friction between China and the U.S., where tensions between the two nations are already at the highest levels that we've seen in years. All right, want to turn now to Norway, where police reportedly removed Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg and at least 9 other people from a protest. The group was speaking out against Norwegian wind farms built on land that's used by indigenous people. Thunberg told Reuters that indigenous rights are human rights that must go hand in hand with climate protection and climate action. All right, and lastly, a fascinating study out of Europe. Researchers unveiled analysis of genome data from hundreds of hunters and gatherers who lived on the continent around the time of the period of the Ice Age. Part of what the study uncovered is that Homo sapiens who entered Europe after coming from Africa were dark-skinned. The genome data showed a change towards lighter skin among people in Europe between 14,000 and 8,000 years ago. They also discovered that human beings that were living on the Italian peninsula during this time period became extinct because that area was uninhabitable. The only people who survived during the Ice Age's coldest period were the hunters and gatherers who lived in portions of France and the Iberian Peninsula. So pretty cool stuff there.
Wow.
Guys, back to you.
It kind of shows if you have thick skin and can deal with the cold weather, apparently you're set for
Oh, well, I'm not set then.
generations.
Good to learn. All right. Megan, thanks so much.
Thank you. And coming up, it's drug resistant and spreading fast. After the break, the warning from the CDC about a new highly infectious stomach bug sweeping the country.
And a potential game changer for millions of Americans, how one company's plan to cap insulin costs could affect the entire pharmaceutical industry. You're watching Morning News Now.
We're back now with a new warning this morning about a drug-resistant stomach bug that's quickly spreading.
Yeah, it's called Shigella, and the CDC says we're seeing a worrisome increase in the strains of that are resistant to most antibiotic treatments. They say it's also highly contagious. So for more on this, we're joined by Dr. Amesh Adalja, senior scholar at Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, joining us with more. Good morning, Dr. Adalja. Thanks so much for being with us. A lot of people, of course, we've heard of stomach bugs, but Shigella bacterial infections, maybe not something a lot of people are really familiar with. So what are the symptoms here and how are we spreading this?
So Shigella is a bacteria that's been a well-described cause of what's called dysentery, or really severe diarrhea with mucus, sometimes blood, abdominal pain, fevers, and chills. And there's hundreds of thousands of cases that occur in the United States. They just have not been drug resistant. And it's spread the way many GI bugs are spread, through fecal oral content. That means people not washing their hands. They have fecal matter on their hands or in their food, and it gets into someone's mouth. And it's usually something that affects children. But in this particular outbreak with this resistant strain, it seems to be affecting adults because it has seemed to have gotten into sexual networks.
And doctor, to that end, why exactly are we seeing a rise in drug-resistant strains of Shigella right now, and who exactly is most at risk? I know you touched on children and some adults.
So this is not something that just happened overnight. This has been over the last several years. The CDC has noted increasing reports of drug-resistant strains of Shigella. So this has been something that's ongoing. And I think this is part of the general larger policy problem we have with antibiotic resistance, that there's so much injudicious use of antibiotics. So many people get antibiotics for coughs and colds. And what it does is it makes many of our organisms resistant to those antibiotics. And we know during COVID-19 that a lot of overuse of antibiotics occurred when people had COVID-19. I'm not sure if that's linked, but in general, we have a problem with antibiotics. Who's at risk? It's going to be children. And as you said earlier, this is very contagious. It just takes a few organisms, maybe 10 organisms, to cause infection. Children are usually where you see this, but it can infect anybody. And what's happening now is that we're seeing this kind of moving in networks of men who have sex with men. This is something that we saw with monkeypox, how it wasn't strictly a sexually transmitted infection, but it was transmitting through sexual contact. And that's what's happening with this strain, that we're seeing a lot of reports, mostly in men, and many men who have sex with men, rather than the traditional group that usually had Shigella.
And Doctor, you mentioned some good practices here to help prevent this, so hand washing, that type of thing. You also mentioned COVID, though, so a lot of people think about a possible vaccine for this, but no, it is a bacteria. What can be done to prevent the spread?
The biggest thing is going to be hand hygiene, washing your hands after you go to the bathroom. And if you're sick, if you've got diarrheal symptoms, to make sure that you're washing your hands a lot and that other people know, especially if you're engaging in sexual activity when you're sick. You should make sure that your partner knows that. The other thing is they do try to make vaccines for bacterial infections. There just haven't been one for Shigella. People have dealt with Shigella for some time, and you treat it with antibiotics. Eventually, I do think that there will be vaccine development, but it's probably not something that's going to happen in the near term.
Well, until then, I'll just keep washing our hands as much as we can. Dr. Adalja, thanks so much for your time.
And we have more details about major health news we brought you just yesterday. Pharmaceutical company Eli Lilly says it will immediately cap the out-of-pocket cost for its two biggest selling insulin products to $35 a month. But that's not all. The company also says it will be slashing the price of its unbranded insulin to $25 a vial, making it the lowest list price for insulin on the market. President Biden praised the decision, saying other companies will have to follow suit as a result. NBC News correspondent Kristen Dahlgren has the details.
Well, patients and advocates and doctors we talked to say they were surprised but thrilled by the news.
It's being hailed as a huge win for diabetics. Drug maker Eli Lilly announcing it's cutting the list price of its most commonly prescribed insulin by 70% and capping out-of-pocket costs at $35 a month.
Such a relief. It's a huge, significant step in making this disease manageable.
Anne-Marie Gibson's sons both use Eli Lilly insulin for their diabetes. They spoke to NBC News in December as costs in America soared for the life-saving drug.
I'm so angry. It's exhausting.
In January, the Inflation Reduction Act imposed a monthly cap on insulin costs for seniors on Medicare, but millions of younger diabetics were still paying much higher rates. The move comes after years of political and patient pressure.
I think we all have heard enough about insulin affordability. Here in America, we should be able to solve this problem ourselves.
Eli Lilly's cap automatically applies to people with private insurance. Those without coverage will be eligible as long as they sign up for a savings card through the company. But only about 30% of the nation's 8.4 million diabetics who rely on insulin get it from Eli Lilly.
Do you expect to see the other drug makers following suit?
I certainly hope that they do. I think that in general, all of the insulins that the drug manufacturers make should be affordable and accessible.
Insulin makers Sanofi and Novo Nordisk pointed to their own savings plans for participants. For mom Anne-Marie Gibson is a good start to saving lives.
Rationing insulin gets scary. Some have died.
Knowing her sons now face a future where a vital prescription won't carry such a hefty price. Kristen Dahlgren, NBC News.
All right, turning now to more medical breaking news. Walgreens has announced a partnership with Uber and DoorDash to deliver HIV medication to patients for free. Walgreens says the service will be available to anyone who lives within 15 miles of their stores. It's part of the company's initiative to support the White House National AIDS HIV strategy. The goal is to bring down HIV infections by 75% over the next 2 years.
And coming up, it's typically a who's who of rising stars for the Republican Party, but this year's CPAC will have some high-profile no-shows. We'll tell you who's skipping out and what it could mean for 2024.
And college costs are going up, way up at some of the most elite schools in the country. What students should brace for next on Morning News Now.
Welcome back. CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, is billed as one of the biggest political events of the year. And while headliners like President Trump and failed gubernatorial candidate Kari Lake will be there, what may be most notable this year is who will not be there. NBC News correspondent Dasha Burns is in Maryland, where CPAC is about to kick off its second day and joins us now with the latest. Good morning, Dasha. I can see a busy room behind you, or at least a room that's starting to get full. So the two confirmed 2024 presidential candidates, President Donald Trump and Nikki Haley, will be there at CPAC. But who else can we expect to see?
You're not going to be interviewing anyone?
Yeah, Zinkley. Well, as you mentioned, this is a narrative more so about who is here and who is not here. But in terms of the speakers that we're going to see throughout the next couple of days, we're going to see My Pillow's Mike Lindell, Senator Ted Cruz, Senator Tim Scott, Senator J.D. Vance, Steve Bannon, Mike Pompeo, Lauren Boebert, some of those stalwarts of the right wing of the Republican Party. And this really is the Trump show, though, Zinkley. This is a conference that has been remade in Trump's image. Now, this used to be sort of the center of gravity for conservatives each year when this conference happens. But now that gravitational pull is disrupted a little bit. As we'll talk about in a moment, there are some folks, notable names, especially looking towards 2024, that are not here.
So, yeah, Dasha, let's get into that, because two of the biggest names in the party right now, former Vice President Mike Pence and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, are skipping this conference. So what exactly are they doing instead, and do we know why?
So they are actually going to be at the Club for Growth, a private donor event in Florida, also Trump's turf, mind you. They are going to be speaking there and talking to donors there instead. I mean, look, this is significant. Ron DeSantis did speak at the conference last year, but this time around, it's a little bit of a divided split screen within the Republican Party. You have former President Donald Trump, who is really the main event here. This is the guy that everyone is here to see. But at the end of the conference, there is going to be a straw poll, and DeSantis will be on the ballot there. So it'll be interesting to see. Of course, this is very much the MAGA crowd that's going to be here. So if DeSantis can run up the numbers just a little bit on that straw poll at the end of the conference, we'll be watching to see what happens there. And we'll be watching to see the reception that Nikki Haley is going to get as Trump's challenger showing up here on his turf, Zinkley.
A litmus test for 2024. Dasha, thank you so much.
All right, now to a new TikTok filter. It's at the center of a much heated debate among many of the users of the app. It's been used more than 8.5 million times, and some people, they love the effect. Others say it's annoying, but maybe even dangerous, and that it creates unrealistic beauty expectations. NBC News correspondent Valerie Castro has more on what people are saying about bold glamour.
You can't even tell it's a filter anymore.
What do you think? Do I look better with it?
Definitely made my lips bigger.
Bold glamour, the latest viral TikTok filter, is causing a stir. It has users divided over the way it instantly changes how they look compared to what they see in reality.
This filter should be illegal. Here's the real me.
Some are amazed.
So this is you without it, right? You look normal. Okay, and this is you with the filter.
Oh my goodness.
What do you think about how you look?
I think it's amazing, like some famous actress.
But not everyone loves the look. Even actress Katherine Heigl saying this filter is not for me.
I don't like it so much, I have to say.
Why don't you like it?
I look a bit fake, yes. Too perfect.
What do you think?
You have to live up to like this expectation, like this look that's not realistic, and it creates a world in your mind that doesn't exist. It's destructive to the identity.
It's concerning. This is what a human face looks like.
Content creator Hira Mustafa stunned by the new standard the filter is setting.
What is it about bold glamour that makes it different from those other filters that we've seen?
It was just a completely different face to me. The lips were larger, eyes were larger, skin tone was lighter.
I've seen more people in my age group than ever pursue cosmetic surgeries to make their faces look more like these filters. And I worry about how this impacts young girls' confidence.
A recent CDC study found that 57% of teenage girls reported feeling hopeless or sad. Many believe social media is among the causes for the drastic increase.
We're going to see psychological consequences.
Psychology professor Renee Englund has spent more than 20 years studying the effects of media and photo editing on women and girls.
You could be forgiven for not even noticing that all of the faces you see are filtered all the time.
She says when the filtered face you see is your own, it's a standard you might never be able to attain.
It's one thing to compare yourself to like some famous, beautiful person. It's another thing to compare yourself to an extra beautiful version of yourself that doesn't exist in the world anywhere.
TikTok hasn't responded to NBC's request for comment on the new filter, but in somewhat of an about face today, TikTok announcing new restrictions on screen time for users under 18, limiting them to 60 minutes a day before requiring a passcode to continue use. The company says it's all to promote parental involvement in their children's digital well-being. Do you think there needs to be more of that?
I would love to see that, especially for her.
Brad Baker's daughter, Abby, is 16 years old.
Okay. What do you think?
It doesn't look like me.
Do you like it? You don't like it?
I like it. I think it's cool. Well, I don't usually wear any makeup, so it's just kind of weird to see.
Her dad, a high school teacher, also trying it out, seeing only subtle changes in his own face versus a drastic transformation in his daughter's appearance.
Yeah, it gives me a little bit more color in the face and, you know, could be improved. A little bit more hair on top would be nice. You know it is.
Okay. And what do you think about what it does to your daughter's face?
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see them having, I mean, you can tell it like definitely makes their lips bigger and make the, you know, the eyes with the makeup kind of stand out. I definitely like her 10 times better in natural.
Oh, and our thanks to Valerie Castro for that report. That psychology professor Valerie spoke with, by the way, says she's concerned that filter is creating an unattainable beauty standard and that our brains just really can't help but immediately make that comparison between the filter and our own faces.
Now to our financial headlines. Tesla could soon become a little more affordable after a recent vow to cut production costs.
Yeah, CNBC's Silvana Henao joins us with that and more money news. Silvana, good morning.
Hey, Stephen, Zinkley, good morning to you. Yeah, so Tesla is vowing to cut production costs of its electric vehicles in half as it plans for the world to embrace sustainable energy. But at the company's Investor Day event last night, CEO Elon Musk didn't unveil when Tesla will debut a long-awaited affordable car. He had been expected to discuss plans to make a less expensive electric vehicle to help broaden Tesla's appeal and fend off the competition. Musk did say discounts Tesla has offered this year have led to an increase in demand. Speaking of Tesla, it will soon launch a new unlimited overnight charging plan for $30 a month. It's part of the company's energy retailing business called Tesla Electric. It will initially be rolled out to owners in Texas in July, and Tesla says it can afford to do this through its relationships with utilities who have a surplus of power at night, thanks to lower demand and strong wind power. And fans of Ted Lasso will now be able to get their hands on the coach's famously persuasive shortbread cookies as a frozen dessert. Starting today, you can grab a scoop of biscuits with the boss at Jenny's Splendid ice cream shops through the store's app, or you can buy it online for $12 a pint. It's described as crumbly shortbread cookies and buttery sweet cream. Some customers can also score exclusive Jenny's and Ted Lasso merchandise. The third season of the Apple TV show premieres on March 15th, guys, and I still haven't watched it.
Still haven't watched it, but now I would like to taste the biscuit.
Yeah, I haven't watched it either, but I'm down for biscuits with the boss. Yeah, let's go.
Sounds delicious. We'll go after the show. Silvana, thank you so much.
All right.
All right, well, we're waiting for that much-anticipated ruling from the Supreme Court on President Biden's student debt relief plan. But this morning, the cost of higher education, well, it's in the spotlight for another reason. It looks like students at several of the nation's elite private universities and colleges will be facing price hikes next year. Many of the these colleges and universities have released their tuition rates for next year. And according to Forbes, students can expect to see at least a 4% increase. Sandy Baum, senior fellow at the Center on Education, Data and Policy at the Urban Institute, joins us now for a closer look at all of this. Not the most welcome news, Sandy. Thanks for being with us, though. So why are we seeing this trend in rising tuition rates, especially at that 4% or higher mark?
Well, the first thing to understand is the price we're talking about is the sticker price. It's, if you look on the website, what they will say: if you get no financial aid, you have to pay. But most students at these institutions are not paying those prices. These elite institutions are institutions that meet full financial need. So they figure out how much they think you can afford to pay. You might not agree with that, but then they give you enough aid to fill the gap, frequently without loans. So this price that is increasing applies to students from families with incomes that are so high that the college thinks they can afford $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 a year. So that's the first thing to understand. And then the second thing is inflation. I mean, 7% at Stanford is a high increase by historical standards, certainly. But remember, inflation was, more than 6% in this year and more than 7% the year before. So these prices are actually not keeping up with the increases in other prices in the economy.
Fascinating to think about it that way. And you mentioned Stanford. Do we know what other colleges and universities are seeing the highest tuition hikes? And is it possible to give us a general idea about how much these places are typically asking?
Well, we don't know all of the price increases yet, but the others that have announced are lower than the 7%. We hear some 5%, we hear some 4%, and the range of prices. I mean, the problem is that Stanford and Harvard and Williams and Amherst have much higher prices than most private colleges in the country. So thinking about, an $80,000 tuition fees, room and board price tag at some of these institutions is just not representative of what the vast majority of college students face, because these are unusually expensive colleges, but they're cheaper for low and moderate income students than even frequently the local community college.
Wow, certainly a glimmer of hope in hearing it that way. And Sandy, I know whatever institution that people are studying at, paying for college can be just a real financial strain. Do you have any tips at all to help sort of offset any types of increase in costs?
There's no question that college is very expensive, and it has become a larger share of income over time for everyone except people at the very top of the income distribution. Apply for financial aid. Fill out the federal application for financial aid. If the institution asks for another application, do it. Don't hesitate to apply because of the sticker price, because you might get generous aid. But look very carefully at your offers to make sure you understand how much you will be expected to pay. Apply for financial aid.
That's a great advice there. All right, Sandy Baum, thanks so much for your insights.
Thank you.
Coming up, we have liftoff. New this morning, SpaceX celebrating a successful rocket launch.
Yeah, that's after an earlier attempt this week was scrubbed. We'll tell you about the crew, their mission, and what it means for us Earthlings sticking around back here at home. This is Morning News Now. Welcome back. It was a romantic sight in the sky last night, sort of. Some astronomers are saying it was a kiss between two planets. Jupiter and Venus were very close to each other overnight. Now, it's not, of course, actually a kiss. Astronomers say it's a conjunction, meaning Venus is passing Jupiter as they both orbit the sun. But the planets looked very close together from our perspective here on Earth. They're still actually about 400 million miles apart, though. If you missed this last night, the next time Jupiter and Venus will share a kiss will be in February 2032. A little while to wait there.
Well, I thought you're not supposed to kiss and tell, but it looks like they already told us when they're next going to kiss.
Putting them on blast,
so.
Yeah, that's true.
Stephen, thank you.
3, 2, 1. Engines full power. And liftoff at Cruise 6. Go Dragon, go Falcon.
Now launching on Endeavour's fourth flight to the International Space Station.
The cheers you just heard, well, that's the sound of success coming from the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida overnight, right after the NASA SpaceX crew had a successful launch into orbit.
Yeah, maybe a little bit sweeter for them because this was the crew's second attempt at blasting off this week. Monday's launch was abruptly called off due to a filter clog in the engine's ignition system.
Mike Massimino, former NASA astronaut and senior advisor for space programs at the Intrepid Museum, joins us now to talk more about this mission. Thank you for being here. Clearly, exciting day.
Yeah.
Rousing success for them.
Yep.
But this is just the first part of their journey. So walk us through what a crew can expect in these first 24 hours.
So they are getting acclimated, trying to get some sleep for sure. You know, it's a big day launching, so they'll try to get a little bit of rest. The next big event for them is going to be the rendezvous and docking with the space station, which occurs about 24 hours after they launch. So early morning, you know, set your clocks around 1:15 or so. They should be docking with the space station, and then they'll ingress and get settled in the space station.
Oh, my goodness.
Probably so excited for them to actually be on board that space station.
Yeah.
And we know about the crew. There are 4 men on board. What else do we know about this crew?
Well, one of my good friends, Steve Bowen, is the commander of the mission. He's been an astronaut for quite a while. He has not flown since the shuttle days. So he was selected. I was selected in '96. He came into NASA in 2000.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and his last flight was in 2011. So he's been hanging in there for a while for this long duration flight. So I'm very excited for Steve. Woody Holberg is another American on board. He's a newer astronaut, so he's on his first flight, as the other 2 crew members are too. We have a Russian on board, and also the first astronaut from the UAE, who will be spending time on a long duration flight on the space station. So it's a bit historic in that respect as well.
I mean,
so happy for all of them. Yeah.
Since you're so close to them, have they given you any insight into what it's been like so far, even with the initial fail and now the success?
I haven't spoken to them since they've been down at the Cape, but these things happen when one of my launches was delayed a day. You know, we woke up thinking we were going to space, and then we found out we weren't. They were on the launch pad, though. That's a little closer. But all that means is you have another day or 2 to hang around and see your family and get ready to go. This is what happens sometimes in the space business. So I think that the delay, you know, they wouldn't necessarily sign up for a delay, but that's part of the game.
Yeah.
You want to make sure everything's good before you actually light the rocket ship. But I'm sure they're very, very excited about what's ahead of them, which is spending time, 6 months is the plan on the International Space Station.
Right, not a short mission. What are they expecting to do?
So they'll be doing lots of experiments. What the space station is about now is about the science and the research. It is a laboratory with several different labs up there. They'll be conducting over 200 experiments during their time there. Basic science research and a lot of research into how the human body performs in space. There's still a lot of questions we're trying to figure out. Technology that needs to be developed, like being able to grow food and so on. We've made a lot of strides, but we're looking toward the moon and beyond, and to do that, we need to understand a lot more about how humans perform in space. So a lot of interesting things will be coming down. I'll probably get a spacewalk or 2 in there. I hope they get a chance to do that as well. So, well, we'll look forward to following their flight over the next 6 months. There's going to be 11 people on board, which is a pretty crowded space station. Yeah. But the crew, another SpaceX crew, crew 5, will be returning in a few days, so that'll clear up some room.
That's actually something I was curious about. Just I wanted to ask an astronaut. They meet and train together before. They're not just all of a sudden thrown on this, right? I've always felt like that would be so awkward, just to be thrown on a spacecraft, thrown up there and have to meet new people.
Yeah, no, it's the time you spend with your crew. You spend 6 months together in space, but you also spend a lot of time on the ground. The shuttle flights were a little more of that. The training flow together as a crew was a bit longer than what they have now. But yeah, you bond with that crew on Earth, and you spend a lot of time together on Earth. You have that 6 months in space, but they get to know each other pretty well and their families, and it's the closest relationships I've had outside of my family or with my crewmates. It's like a hybrid between family and friendship. And I've spoken to, I think 3 of my crewmates this week from my last flight, which was in 2009. It was like 14 years ago.
I love it.
But they're some of my best friends, and it's a very special relationship that you have with those people. Kind of like co-anchoring a news program.
I was going to say, and you're a friend of the show.
You spend a lot of time together, and you develop these close relationships, and it's a wonderful thing that doesn't end after you leave the office.
Absolutely.
Great to hear.
I love that.
I'm happy for all of
behind the scenes insight there.
There you go.
Yeah.
Mike Massimino giving us that out of this world, rather, news. Thank you so much.
All right, that's going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now.
The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.